My next guest's worst moment, watching her child fight for her life in the ICU, became the unexpected start of her whole business. She's here to talk about how her own breakdown led to a breakthrough for countless others. This episode is brought to you by the Hurt Self-Assessment. Are you wondering what hidden patterns or past experiences might be holding you back? The Hurt Assessment's a free tool that is designed to help you gain clarity on your own emotional well-being. You can discover your results at flipyourmindset.com/hurt. That's HURRT. Today, I am honored to be joined by Lisa Ramos. Lisa is a doctoral candidate and founder of the Trauma-Informed Care Institute. After her own family health crisis, which led to a diagnosis of PTSD, Lisa went back to college to heal herself, and now she teaches medical professionals and parents all things about trauma. All right, guys, welcome back to Flip Your Mindset. As you know, I am your host, Stacey Uhrig, and today's guest is Lisa Ramos. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I am great. Great to see you, Stacey.
I'm so excited because you have something called the Trauma Care Informed Institute, which I've gone down a rabbit hole revisiting over the last few days. So I know we're going to have a really great conversation here that's going to allow the listeners to become more trauma informed, which is something I'm always working on with my audience. But I'd really love to start before we get there for you to start to share with us. My understanding is that you had an experience in 2015 that was very traumatic, where your one child was she ill? Did she have an accident? What exactly happened?
Yeah, so we actually have 8 children. And at the time, she was our youngest. She was just 15 months old at the time. And she was exposed to MRSA at a Christmas party, or it was kind of like a Christmas get together with the kind of extended family. And she was exposed to MRSA. We didn't know it until about 2 weeks later. So she ended up, I guess, ingesting it, and it got into her throat. It got stuck in her throat and started to build an abscess in her throat. She then got sick, and we were raw foodists at the time. So she had never been sick at 15 months old. She had never had, she was just a very pure child at that point. And so she ended up getting sick. And that was kind of a little bit of a flag for us because her cough sounded odd. So we took her to the doctor, said, she's good. She's got no ear infection. She's got nothing in her lungs. She's good. Just let the virus go through her body. So she got worse and worse to the point she couldn't lift her head. She started to have symptoms of spinal meningitis. And so we took her back, and they said they're not sure what's going on with her. Take her into the hospital. We did that. And then we found out that she did have spinal meningitis.
Wow.
So she actually had, in total, spinal meningitis, RSV, and MRSA all at the same time.
Oh my goodness.
So we first found out about the spinal meningitis, and they thought it was bacterial. So they gave her a medication, and that medication completely shut her down. She went into a coma once they gave her that medication. And I told them, I don't think it's that. Like, it's really messing her up. And they basically gave us no choice. And we did not want to keep giving her that medication because she ended up in a coma after taking it. We knew it wasn't the bacterial meningitis that they were talking about. But of course, they didn't listen to us because we weren't medical professionals. So we continued testing, and then they ended up finding out it was not bacterial meningitis. It was viral meningitis, which is safer. Bacterial meningitis is very difficult to recover from. So they said it was viral spinal meningitis. They gave her a 50% chance of survival, but she kept declining. Her kidneys stopped working. She blew up, like
Yeah.
all her pores were seeping. And then they found the MRSA. And once they found the MRSA, it was a rush to surgery because they said if the MRSA abscess burst, it would kill her instantly. Well, it did burst and ended up in her chest. So what we didn't know is it filled her entire chest full of MRSA. It got into her joints, um, and it just spread throughout her body. So she was given basically no chance of survival. They did do a very risky surgery, and she made it through that, but she kept getting worse. And so they gave her no chance of survival. And so, of course, my husband and I are there the whole time, and we stayed there with her throughout the process. She held on for 23 days and she did recover. They, in the process, the medical professionals gave us no autonomy, no
Right.
choice. They speak to you as if you don't know what you're talking about. And so it was a very, very difficult thing to do, to lose all sense of power over our child. When they took her off of life support, that was what was happening, is they took her off of life support, and within 2 hours she was sitting up. Within 4 she was talking again. The next day her she was improving, improving, improving. And she did end up surviving. I was still breastfeeding at the time, and they do feel like that really helped her. And then just her being such a pure child since birth, I think really gave her a good immune system. But the main thing was it was a very long process. She had to go through 6 weeks of IV antibiotics after that. And so, for the course of about 3 months, we were dealing with this. For about a month, we were dealing with any day she could pass away. And she did code at one point, but they were able to bring her back. Um, and so it was just that loss of autonomy, that loss of just the ability to do anything
Mm-hmm.
was very triggering for me.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't realize it at the time because I didn't have an education at the time. I just kind of, you know, was a parent. I was working, doing normal stuff. I didn't know that much. And so,
When
but
you
what
say
I
you didn't know
realized,
that much, do you mean about yourself?
yeah, about myself and
Yeah.
how I process trauma from my past.
Right.
So, um, what turns out now that I know that I went into a freeze state because while we were in the hospital, she wasn't able to eat or drink, and I quit eating and drinking. I ended up getting down to like 80 pounds. I put myself into a thyroid storm. It was just a mess because I went into a freeze response. I was
Mm.
waiting for something to happen, and I didn't realize what I was doing at that point. But I ended up, because it was so long, I ended up really damaging myself, the my health. I damaged my health, and then I was really kind of having a lot of trouble psychologically from the time that, like, every time I would go to sleep, I would hear her coding, and it was I would jump awake because when she coded, I was asleep next to her, and so every time I would go to sleep,
There was
I
a
would
part of you that was becoming more alert. I just
yeah.
want to give you a moment to pause for a second because I can imagine that just even retelling the story can feel overwhelming. So I just want to check in with your parts for a second to see how you're feeling as you're sharing all of that.
And that's because you're so aware of trauma
I
trauma
really
informed
am.
care. You're giving me a trauma informed podcast here.
Yeah. How are
Yeah,
you? Can I just give some
yeah,
space for your parts just to remember we're
yeah,
just revisiting this, right? And
yeah.
because when we recall, we retell, it can put us back in that place, right? We know that there's parts of our brain that kind of are timeless. And if we're revisiting that with imagery, it can feel as though we're going back through it all over again. So I just want to check in with your nervous system to see how you're feeling as you're sharing all of that.
Yeah, I don't talk about it that much anymore, just mostly because people don't ask.
How old
Um,
is your daughter now?
she is 11. No, she just turned 12.
All right. So this was,
So, like,
11 years ago.
yeah, it was 11 years ago. Um, but yeah, it still can be difficult to talk about
Of course.
sometimes, and I appreciate taking the pause and kind of down regulating myself here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's so interesting what you were saying. And I think that a lot of people can relate to this is that we know as trauma practitioners, right? Or people who are trauma trained, trauma formed, that, that feeling of feeling unseen, unheard, insignificant, especially in times of crisis, can be very, very triggering.
yeah,
And when we talk about this idea of trauma, I actually don't love it when people talk about like big T trauma and little t trauma, because I personally think that, the nervous system doesn't discriminate or doesn't distinguish between the difference between being chased by a tiger and worry about opening an email from your boss if you're worried about losing your job. Like your body responds very similarly.
yeah,
It's very primitive that way. So, if we grew up, there's two things. If we grew up feeling unseen, unheard, insignificant, being back in an environment where we are desperately trying to be heard because we're at such a critical stage of something and we're not being heard, that can be incredibly triggering. But in
yes,
addition, even if you didn't grow up in an environment where you felt unseen or unheard and you felt like you had a really solid connection and all of those needs were met by your caregiver, it would still be incredibly challenging to feel like you have no agency over the care of your child when intuitively you knew, listen, this is not right for her, that you got to be doing this. And this is why I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys got so passionate, you and your husband, about creating the Trauma Informed Care Institute, so people like doctors and other types of professionals can become more trauma informed. Is that accurate?
yeah. That's exactly why we created it,
Yeah.
is so that they can be more trauma informed. And even though someone may not have a medical degree, having that sense of agency and really having that clarity of what's happening, or given even a small choice, can restore some power back into the person going through whatever is
Right.
happening. And so, yeah, that's exactly why we created Trauma Informed Care Institute, is to really help medical professionals to understand the patient has is as much a part of this process as they are,
And
as
not
the
only
person.
that, but the patient is often the expert of their
Exactly.
own body. I mean, if you've never met, I'm going to make a connection for you. If you've never met Dr. Veronica Mead, she's been on my podcast twice. She used to work out of Dartmouth as a medical doctor, and she has since left, and she runs a website called chronicillnesstraumastudies.com. And
Mm.
all she does is really kind of study expanded versions of ACEs, um,
Oh,
and kind of pinpoint them to different challenges that people have medically and physically. And then she creates trauma informed PDFs for people to take to their doctors. Right.
really?
I know. And we're going to have to make a little connect here.
Yeah.
She's amazing. She's been on my podcast twice, but the second time she was on it, we actually flipped the script and she interviewed me because I've been diagnosed with 3 different autoimmune conditions in my lifetime. And, when we were talking in that interview, she was asking me how I got my rheumatoid. It was a seronegative rheumatoid arthritis diagnosis in my 40s. And I told her I really had to be bold and advocate for myself because I knew there was something very, very wrong with my body. And I was just kind of getting pushed through this system and nobody was listening and nobody was stopping and taking the time. And that's dual. Part of that is the way that a lot of these healthcare systems are managed now by private equity or what have you, where they're given 15 minutes, 20
Yep.
minutes for a sick visit and maybe 45 minutes for a well visit, which makes no sense.
Yep.
Um, and and also they're not trained to see the mind and the body and the psyche all to be connected together.
Right.
So I'm hoping medical professionals are going to start to be trained differently. But the
Yeah.
reality is that when we're in a hospital setting or any kind of setting where there's a fear of a life being lost or there's fear of permanent damage to our body, we need to be in the most trauma informed space
Exactly. Exactly.
because this is
I
where everybody's unhealed shit's going to start to come to the surface.
Right.
so
Exactly.
so you go through this process with your daughter,
Yeah.
very traumatic, right?
Very
And we
traumatic.
know trauma can be a lot of different types of trauma, right? So
Yeah.
you've got acute traumas, you've got medical traumas, you've got secondary vicarious trauma. I'm seeing you having access to all of this.
Yes.
And then also, if we have unhealed experiences from childhood, if there's a complex trauma or a developmental trauma, that's like what I'm going to say is the anchor, meaning we have these unresolved challenges that never were processed. Now, all
Yep.
that comes up to the surface as well. Is that what happened for you?
Yeah, that's what happened for me. So like you had mentioned, when you don't feel like your voice is heard, that's how I did go through that as a child. And
Right.
so it was very triggering for me to not be allowed to have a voice in my own child's life in the hospital setting there. Um, and having that autonomy taken away from me and her, and I kept trying to advocate for my daughter, and it was pushed aside, pushed aside. And I loved how you said that, because that's one of the things, like, I know uh, we also teach trauma informed parenting. And one of the things in our trauma informed parenting, building children who are able to advocate for themselves. As a child, they're taught to follow rules so much, and it's good to follow rules, but to understand why is important,
Yeah.
and to advocate for themselves. So the daughter I'm speaking about now, she's a very shy individual. She's 12 years old, like I said, but she started school and she lost her hearing in her left ear. And so when she first started school, they wouldn't put her on an IEP, even though she had lost her hearing. And it's
Did
you
she
a speech,
lose her hearing during this event in the hospital?
yes,
Okay, from the MRSA and the spinal.
right,
Okay. Yep.
yep. So it was from the antibiotic that they gave her, she lost her hearing. And so as soon as she started school, I tried to get her an IEP. And as a speech pathologist, you probably know, if you're missing half your hearing, you're probably not speaking correctly. So she had a speech delay. She had multiple things that should have given her an IEP. But because she put so much effort into her schoolwork, they denied her an IEP.
Mhm.
And so I had to continue advocating for her, and move schools. And she has now, that's why I teach her to advocate for herself.
Yeah.
And now at
Mhm.
12 years old, she'll have kids tell her something like peer pressure, and she'll say, "No, that doesn't feel right for me. I'm not going to do that." It's not about being in the popular group. It's not about what that is. It's about what's right for me.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of her for that. And that's another thing that's come from this, just going through that experience. And it's gained so much knowledge, because our kids range from 9 to 27. We have 8 children. So we have a set of older children, we have grandkids. But I didn't know trauma informed care back then when I was raising my first set of kids. So I did not teach them autonomy. So
Listen,
with
we're
that,
going to have a whole second podcast. I'm going to have you come back to talk about trauma informed parenting because I've been talking about that on the sly for a
oh,
long time. So when I saw that you were doing that certification, I was very happy to see it because there are very specific times where we need trauma informed parenting, and I feel very strongly about that. And there are some areas which we can talk about in another show where it's a requirement,
Yeah.
right? And if parents don't know that and they're just parenting as per usual, there's going to be a challenge. So
Yeah.
you come out of this scenario with a tremendous amount of post trauma wisdom.
Yeah. Well, really, I came out of it kind of just broken mentally
Yeah.
and emotionally and physically. Because as I said, we have a lot of children. So our other children obviously couldn't be there at the hospital. So our older children had not had their parents home for about a month. They were taken care of by someone else. And they were going through their own experience.
Yeah.
You know, their sister may pass away and they can't even see her. They wouldn't let them into the hospital. And so coming home, I had a lot of guilt over not being there for those children. I had a lot of fear from what we had just gone through, and I was consumed with trying to gain control again because her getting MRSA, they said it was you'd have a better chance of winning the lottery than getting all the sickness that she got. And it's like, how do I gain control? How do I keep this from happening again? Because I felt like if she got sick again, she won't survive it the second time. So for years, I was struggling. And so I knew I was struggling afterwards, about 6 months to a year afterwards. I was really struggling emotionally,
What did
physically,
that
and
look like? Can you
psychologically.
paint us a picture of what struggling was looking like for you?
Yeah, it got to the point where I just couldn't function. I couldn't get out of bed for more than 15 minutes at a time. Once I did, my entire body I was in pain, like physical all the time. I was constantly on edge. Any little thing happened, I would lash out, I would yell, or I was very irritable. But then physically also, I started having heart issues and like a lot of palpitations, and I started having a lot of digestive issues, and I started having um, reproductive issues. And so I was just breaking down. And like you said, you knew intuitively inside your body something was wrong.
Yeah.
And that's where I was. Something is wrong. And it continued to the point where um, I had gotten I got to the point where I was having difficult speaking. Like I would have it in my mind, but I couldn't get it out my mouth. And then my husband and my kids were all scared, like, what's happening to mom? You know, and so then I had that guilt, like, why can't I just shake this off? And I had survivor guilt because she survived. So why am I having trouble? Why can I not just shake it off and be there for everybody like I
And
should
what do
be?
you know to be the answer to that now?
Well, at this point, I know that it was because my nervous system was stuck in that state.
Yeah.
And I was still in that moment and every single day. So every time I came out, and if my kids were, kids fight.
Yeah.
So if my kids were fighting even a little bit, it was like, it was just too much for my nervous system to process. And then, of course, then I react, like we do with the overstimulated nervous system. And then the guilt starts. And it's this horrible cycle that's happening within the nervous system. And then the nervous system is wanting to keep you safe. So it's going to shut you down. And you're going to stay in that fight or flight mode. And your body is going to take that toll. And so that's what happened for me.
So what
And
did
yeah,
you do? How did you get to the other side?
so I actually ended up having a baby afterwards. That's my 8th child.
Okay.
After this whole event, I ended up having a baby. So I was nursing my daughter pregnant, and then I was tandem nursing. And finally, I'm like, I need help. My husband started to think that I had postpartum depression, and I told him I don't have postpartum depression. I don't feel anything about that. It's just I can't get out of my head. I can't sleep. Every time I go to sleep, I'm still being triggered. And so I tried to look for a therapist, a psychologist, something. I tried to look for anything. I went to my doctor. I told her what was happening. They diagnosed me with PTSD. Um, I didn't want to take medication because I felt like it was just going to keep me stuck there. I wanted to get better. I did finally get to see a psychologist, and they said the way that my insurance works it is you have to see whoever's available. So I couldn't have the one therapist to talk to every single time. So, of course, I again felt like I had no power, no decision making. They weren't listening to me. And so I decided that since no one is going to listen to me, I have to regain my own power. And I started college later in life. Like I'm in my 30s already. And so I'm like, I'm going to start college. And so that's what I did. I started college to get a psychology degree so that I could figure out how to process what I was going through.
Mm-hmm. And what did you learn when you started going back to school? What was like, can you think of something that was kind of that aha moment for you as you were healing? Or was it just a culmination of everything that you were being taught?
Yeah, honestly, it was more a bunch of small aha moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would see something in psychology and say, oh, well, that's why I did this, or that's why I reacted this way. You know, when your nervous system is overstimulated, you're in something, the prefrontal cortex shuts down
Right.
and you can't reason. And so that is why I would react instead of being able to reason, which I've always done before. And so, yeah, there was a lot of little aha moments throughout the process. But even once I had my master's, I'm like, there's still got to be more because now I know how to heal me. But I don't think other people should have to go through this. And that's kind of what led me into developing the Trauma Informed Care Institute because I know if I went through it, other people are going through it. In fact, I had people coming to me saying they were going through a similar thing where I had a friend come to me whose husband had cancer and he lived, but she was struggling just like I was.
Yeah.
And and so I'm like, okay, how do I put this forward? How do I continue putting this out so that it can help others? And I'm just not sitting on it because I was eventually able to sleep. Now I can sleep just fine. I was able to recover. I was able to recover physically. I have no physical issues remaining. And so I felt like it was something important to put out there to help others in their healing journey.
Yeah. I'd love to address two things. The first thing I want to address is the physical manifestation of
Mhm.
this trauma and this experience. And I just think, I just actually bought the book, The Biology of Trauma, and I can't wait to get it. I don't know if you've heard of this. It just came out like in the last month.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to do a live tomorrow with Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk and Amy,
Really?
who's, whose book is The Biology of Trauma. So I'm really excited about that. But, the reality is that there is a lot of research coming out now
Yeah.
to talk about this correlation of unresolved emotional experiences, unresolved trauma, unhealed wounds, and these physical manifestations. And I think people have a hard time understanding that because they'll say things like, well, it's not trauma because my blood work shows X, or it's not trauma because I actually have a diagnosis. And I'm like, well, I've had 3 diagnoses, but I could pinpoint all of it back to extreme inflammation in my body.
Yep.
And that extreme inflammation started when I was 12, 13 years old. And every illness I've had has a component of extreme inflammation. I've been diagnosed with endometriosis, incredibly painful for
Yeah.
anyone that's had it. It's debilitating. I had that for 13 years before it was even diagnosed.
Wow.
Um, I have been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, seronegative rheumatoid arthritis in my 40s, which was all inflammation. And I've been struggling with Raynaud's syndrome since I was 15 years old. So,
Wow.
some of them have resolved and others are still present. The Raynaud's is a daily existence thing for me. But what
Mhm.
people don't understand is each one of those had blood markers. Each one of those had real blood tests associated with it. Each one of those had true diagnosis associated with it. But I know for sure that that was all the cortisol, the adrenaline, everything that just got trapped in
Yep.
my joints and my muscle fibers from
Yeah.
not being able to process what was going on in my childhood.
Yeah, exactly. So, because when we experience some type of adverse event, whether it's childhood or adult, and our nervous system has to take over to keep us safe,
Yeah.
there's cascading physiological responses in our body. And if our body isn't functioning properly, like, so if it's shutting down our digestion because we're in fight or flight, we can't expect that our digestion is not going to cause a problem.
Right.
It's going to cause a physical problem, and eventually that will be diagnosable. But the deep rooted cause is the fact that we're not shutting off our
Mhm.
nervous system. And so I know that. Um, that's why most physical health issues are do have a root cause into some type of physiological change, typically caused by an emotional response or a
Mhm.
coping mechanism from the nervous system.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Um, if I have a medical professional listening, maybe
Hmm.
it's a nurse, maybe it's a doctor, anybody in the medical realm, and this is not something that they've been taught, right? Like I follow a lot on menopause because I'm in my 50s. I'm well on the other side of that. And, I've had to really educate myself on understanding what was happening, not just in my my whole body was jacked
Yeah.
up, like from head to toe.
Yeah.
Um, and what I learned through that whole process of educating myself, right? So I could be my own best advocate because I was getting denied my own reality, which is what happens in the medical field often, is that, OBGYNs were not taught really anything about menopause. So I can't blame the doctors for not being trauma informed, but if I have a medical professional that's listening, what would it mean to take your course on the Trauma Informed Care Institute, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm. Trauma informed
What would they
Institute.
learn? What would be the benefit to them to take this certification? And by the way, it comes with CEUs, does it not?
It does.
Uh huh.
Yep.
Uh huh. So, all
It
my medical professionals, you listen up.
Yep. It comes with 6.5 CEUs from 9 of the national boards, including the AMA, the APA. It's basically across the board except for optometry.
Okay.
Uh, but let me kind of back up just a bit,
Sure.
because most trauma informed care information on the market currently is going to talk to you about how to touch someone properly. So if you're checking a thyroid and you're like this, you don't want to stand behind them, you want
Sure.
to stand next to them. It's going to tell you how to set up the room so that someone feels a little bit safer. It's going to give you those pieces that help you function in the clinical setting better. But Trauma Informed Care Institute, what we do with our certification is we do go deeper because there's a lot more to just setting up our environment.
And
There's a
can
lot
I hold
more.
you there? Because I think that's so important. And I think it's really important to understand that.
Yeah.
what you just said, it's setting up the environment. I went to a trauma informed yoga course like yoga class once, and I was like, oh, this is going to be fascinating. Like, I can't wait to go to a trauma informed yoga class. And the reason why they were calling it trauma informed is because all the mats faced the door. Okay. So no one could come in from behind. This was
Right.
in their mind a way of sending it up being trauma informed. And in reality, it's smart. You're creating a sense of safety. This is what we're talking about through setting up the environment. Like, so you said, if a practitioner is helping with somebody with their thyroid, they're not coming from behind, they're coming to the side or they're coming
Yeah.
from the front, all these little different things. And I thought about that when I was in PT, and I thought to myself, oh my God, this guy is right over me. And if I had ever been a survivor of sexual assault, this would be very, very triggering right now. It was very mindful to me. It was a very untrauma informed approach to
Yeah.
body work. I only wanted to stop you because I want people to understand that is like the teeniest aspect. It's an important aspect.
Yeah.
But when you talk about getting trauma informed, talk about what some of these modules are and what some of the lessons are, because I kind of did a deep dive and I was like, this is my cup of tea. So explain what these medical professionals would gain understanding of.
Yeah. So in our certification, they're going to gain understanding. Kind of, I'm not going to go into kind of the basics of it because that they will know that what trauma is. Maybe it's gonna maybe broaden the view of what trauma is. But what I feel is really important for medical professionals is to be able to see the signals, kind of like you noticed the signal while I was telling the story.
Yeah.
And you said, okay, let's take a moment. And it only took a moment to downregulate and come back to the conversation. But as medical professionals, they're not trained, and that's obviously not their fault. Their goal is to learn whatever their specialty is, and that is so important. But to use their CEUs to get trauma informed care, I think is so powerful
No doubt.
and makes them stand out above everybody else, because now when a patient comes in, you can notice slight signals that that patient is giving you so that you know that, okay, I need to slow my tone, or maybe I need to explain that more in layman's terms. Maybe I need to ask a question of the client, of the patient, so that they can feel a part of the process. They'll notice the different cues. But not only that I think one of the really big things that I put into the course that to me is the most important piece, really the core, the heart behind why I created this certification this way, is for the professional, for the doctor, for the nurse, for the social worker, for whoever it is, to know their own coping mechanisms.
Right.
So when they come into the room, they understand their own trauma triggers or trauma coping mechanisms, and so that they understand that interaction between them and the patient isn't the patient trying to be non-compliant. This is their nervous system reacting, doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
Right.
And as a professional, we can identify, okay, this isn't about me. It's not that they don't trust me. It's not that they don't respect me. But you may feel that. So understanding that for the professional, but also in these roles, in a professional role like that, it's easy to get compassion fatigue, secondary trauma. And so we address that in the course, how to protect yourself from that so that when you leave that patient, you are leaving that patient and you're not carrying their experience with you and compounding your own trauma from your own childhood. A lot of helping professionals, such as doctors, they're doctors for a reason. Maybe they have chosen that profession because of something that happened in their past. So how does that play into the care that they're giving?
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that's why I feel like when I took trauma-informed care training myself, I was like, okay, this is great. That setting up the environment piece is required. That's like something you need. I have a fly getting at me. That 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 is a piece that you absolutely need. It's essential, but it doesn't stop there. It shouldn't stop there,
Mhm.
because to identify when someone is feeling uncomfortable and to identify your own where you're at for yourself is really important with trauma informed care. Now, for people who work more in depth, say maybe it is a psychologist or someone who is working more in depth, the course does talk about how to go through a session. It goes deeper into what that looks like when you're actually getting your client or your patient to tell their story and how to help them process that. So it does go into that for those professions. That may not be needed for all professions. And I do teach how to apply it in both in person and virtual settings, because even doctors now, it's not all in person. There's a lot of virtual
Yeah.
appointments where we can apply trauma informed care.
So, so, so interesting. And as I was going through your curriculum earlier today over coffee, I was noticing things about the nervous system and the window of tolerance and generational trauma, which might have been in the parenting one. But, this is all stuff that I'm teaching myself, whether I'm in a one-to-one session with a client or I'm doing it through my own course. And it's just so important. I feel like there are certain things when you learn them, you can't unlearn them, or when you see them, you can't unsee them. And understanding the nervous system
Yeah.
and understanding what your nervous system's role is in your life, because we've been so quick to be labeled with disorders or to be deficient or to have something be wrong with us because our nervous system is overactive, but it's reacting to something, whether it's here or from before.
Yep.
And, just even having a doctor be able to do a self check before they walk into an office. Where's my window of tolerance? Where am I within my window of tolerance right now?
Right.
And if I know I'm not within my window, if I'm outside of my window, what can I do in order to get myself back into my window? Which is very hard for medical professionals, especially when they're working 15-hour shifts, 20-hour shifts, 40-hour shifts. Part of staying within that window of tolerance is sleep, it's
Yeah.
nutrition, it's staying hydrated, it's all the things we need to do to keep our physiological body running. And when those things are deficient, we're going to pop out of our window. When we're
Mm.
outside of our window of tolerance, our tolerance for life is very, very thin.
Yeah.
So we're
Yeah.
more apt to react or be snippy. And so it's just, I think it would be great for all medical professionals. I think they should all be required to be trauma trained. Trauma informed is great. I think there's a big difference between trauma informed and trauma trained,
Yeah.
right? So trauma informed is that awareness. Trauma trained is how do I help somebody in recovery of it,
Yeah.
right? But I'm just so grateful that you've put this out there, because it is a missing piece. And as someone who has had many diagnoses, it was a huge missing piece on my
Yeah.
journey and understanding what was going on in my body. And sometimes, unfortunately, when we become loud and bold and we advocate for ourselves, then we're seen as difficult, right? Which is a whole other trauma.
Yeah.
That could be
And
an old wound that's never been healed.
yeah, but that's the thing. If the people we're dealing with are trauma informed,
They'd be
we will
aware.
feel seen and heard.
Yeah,
And I loved how you said that about a professional working those long hours.
so true.
And that is exactly one of the things that we teach in the course is that window of tolerance, and to identify, do that self check each time you meet with a patient and see if you're outside of it. We give those strategies in the course for how to get back inside your window of tolerance. And that can be easy to get outside of, especially when you're going patient to patient to patient to patient, because we're seeing illnesses, we have patients that are non-compliant, we have patients who are seen as difficult. And just if you're in there, let's say there's a pediatrician who's in with a child who's really suffering, when they go in to see that next patient, they may still be thinking about the previous patient. So, and it works with all types. How do you come into each appointment as clear as possible so that you can give that best care, which is exactly what they want to do. But sometimes when we're working those long hours, it can be very difficult to catch that window of tolerance slipping.
Yeah. Well, I think once you start to practice it and you
Yeah.
become mindful and aware of it, it almost just becomes like that daily practice. And I think, for medical professionals listening, they might be like, yeah, that's nice, but I literally have like 30 seconds between patients because of the way that, I'm expected to go and what have you. And that really can kind of even go back to setting up your day
Yeah.
from the beginning as a proactive measure to make sure you're at least walking into that setting with the widest reserve possible of
Yeah.
capacity to hold for other people versus coming in already with a very, very narrow window of capacity.
Yeah. Well, and being trauma informed from the start, going into
Yeah.
your day, if you're trauma informed coming in, you carry less from patient to patient.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to retain that window of tolerance throughout the day when you come into it trauma informed.
No doubt.
When you don't come into it and then you're trying to shift back in, it can be more difficult. But that's why it's such a broad benefit for
Mm-hmm.
anyone in any type of medical profession, even teachers. I mean, our program
Oh,
isn't CEUs for teachers, but if teachers, any type of coach, really anyone can be trauma informed. Like if
no
it was
doubt.
me,
I
it
think next to the medical industry, the least trauma informed space is a school district, unfortunately. And they're dealing with a lot of traumatized kids, whether they realize it or not, which
yeah,
brings me to two things. Number one, I would love to have you back on the podcast just to talk about the trauma informed parenting, because I don't think it's discussed
yeah.
and it needs to be. But before we wrap up, what is one key message that you want to leave with the listener today about becoming more trauma informed, but also understanding their own past traumas?
So what I would say is that just know that every behavior, every action, every reaction has a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It was it's there's something within you that is causing you to think, act, feel whatever you are feeling or acting. So if you find that you continually have a pattern that you don't like, understand that that is not a broken piece of you. That is your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. And as we become trauma informed, we can understand what it was designed, what that thing was that's causing it. And we can use the exact process that created the coping strategy to reprogram that
Yeah.
coping strategy so that we can limit or stop those patterns that are no longer serving us.
Well, you are speaking my language. I was just working on my slides for this week and next week of my course, and this week was all about the nervous system and the window of tolerance, and next week I'm introducing them to parts work and how different parts are present and different dysregulated states. So we're all speaking the same thing. We're all eating the same gelato. It's just a different flavor. Um, I'm really, truly enjoyed having you on the podcast. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time in your very, very busy life of 8 children. I can't imagine. To share this and to really take the time to go back to school and to put this curriculum together, which is so, so, so important. So I just want to remind people that they can learn more about the Trauma Informed Care Institute and its certifications at traumainformedcareinstitute.com. And if this conversation moved you, please share it. These are the stories that create understanding and change. And be sure to subscribe to Flip Your Mindset, because as always, we cannot heal what we don't understand. Thank you, Lisa, so much for coming on. I just cannot thank you enough. And guys, stay tuned. We're going to have her back so we can talk about trauma-informed parenting. Take care.